Lost civilizations. Eumenides is a land of great hardship. While many nations great and small have been born and passed from the view of history, this document details those which have passed so violently and so completely that not much of anything is known about them, even to the most ardent of scholars. The Chasm Dwellers. Foundation unknown, disappearance unknown. Easily the most mysterious of the peoples to inhabit the continent of Eumenides, it is unknown if the Chasm Dwellers ever inhabited the surface of the world. All that remains of their civilization are small dwellings, carved into great rifts in the earth that can sometimes be found. No skeletal or mummified remains have survived, no graves, and no recognizable inscriptions have been found. Some small artifacts made of stone have occasionally been found, but all have been invariably shattered or worn smooth by the march of millennia. The civilization of the Chasm Dwellers, if indeed it even was a unified civilization, was so old that it is not known what other nations, if any, interacted with them. Ancient Erishian oral tradition records that the already empty chasms were explored and used as outposts by the Dominate during its rise to power, which would seem to indicate they had been long since abandoned deep in the annals of prehistory. The Erishian Dominate. Foundation unknown, disappearance estimated around 8,000 years before the fall. A powerful eldritch nation that unified the Erishian mountain range under a mystical, arcane regime. The Dominate was strongly characterized by a history of slavery, human sacrifice to strange gods, and for its use of unspeakable atrocities to maintain order. The Dominate's upper class was at times the majority of its population, and at others, only a small ruling cabal. But always this class ruled through both terror and rapturous apocalyptic religion. What little remains of the Dominate's history has been passed down through the oral tradition of Erishian tribes. If the Dominate did have a system of writing, it was lost long ago. The information that the various chiefs and storytellers can agree upon is that the Dominate warred with and exterminated or enslaved numerous enemies throughout their history. This nation rarely if ever lost a conflict, and would only experience small setbacks at worst. The unbroken chain of victories ultimately ceased during an unknown cataclysmic event that destroyed the civilization and scattered the remaining tribes to the lands around the mountains. The exact nature of the cataclysm is not agreed upon. Some storytellers contend that the Erishians meddled with powers they could not ultimately control. Shamans who participate in the oral tradition often posit that the entire Erishian civilization was sacrificed to their dark gods. Still others, particularly those well versed in the dark arts, have argued in forbidden texts that the situation was, quote, more nuanced. Due to the fragmentary nature of these texts, what this actually means has never been determined. Whatever it may have been, the fate that befell the Erishian civilization had the permanent effect of shrouding the Erishian mountain range in turmoil. Perpetually dark, even on cloudless days, little grows in the cursed earth, and settlements typically do not last long. Even if a community manages to establish itself in the mountains, they face attack from eldritch horrors, indecipherable nightmares, and random plagues of madness that cause men to attack one another, or wander off into the distance, never to be seen again. Legend has it that the ruins of Erishian civilization remain intact, deep within the heart of the mountains and house incredible dormant power, but no expedition has ever returned to confirm this. The Zelenwald Druidic tribes. Foundation unknown, disappearance, roughly 700 years before the fall. A collection of nomadic, shamanistic tribes that once ruled the great northern land known as Zelenwald. Little is known about these tribes as the victorious Gelander paladins, and the Gelavar Hegemony, waged a war of extermination against them, and ordered the destruction of all of their cultural relics and holy texts. As just invoking the names of these nations or their heroes and deities could cause the forests to come alive and swallow men whole, all records of them were purged by the paladins. The Druids' preferred method of rule was to use their powerful magic to turn the wild lands against large settlements. Farmers could only work their land at the leisure of the Druid elders, who demanded human sacrifices and worship in return. Most of the non-Druid population was confined to great cities walled and paved with stone, the only such environment that the Druids did not have direct power over. These cities paid tribute to the Druids to enjoy their continued existence. Vile fates such as being sucked dry by writhing tree roots or irreversibly turned into wild animals befell those who dared defy the Druids. Their reign of terror was eventually ended by the Gelander Order of Paladins and the Gelavar priests, who waged a prolonged campaign of persecution and suppression that eventually eliminated all of the Druidic tribes. There are no known surviving Druid sects, though it is speculated that some disciplines of witchcraft are derived from the old Druidic ways. Empire of Great Myrina. Foundation unknown, disappearance, 112 years before the fall, known constituent polities, Thema of Shonakan, Thema of Quarmi. One of several ancient Acrasian empires that ruled during the pre-Republic era. Hailing from northern Acrasia, the Myrines were initially a nomadic tribe, as was common in that region. However, unlike the other northern Acrasian nomads, the Myrines were a matriarchal society. Curiously, Myrine women were also visibly taller than common Acrasian women. Often Myrine females were the height of the average Acrasian man, and sometimes reported as even taller. Scholars dispute this, however, as the largest feminine skeletons found in tombs and burial sites were never larger than 9.5 links tall. It's unclear precisely when the Myrines became dominant over northern Acrasia, but Acrasian historians speculate that it coincided with the decline of the Salvorian League states around 350 years before the fall. The Myrines conquered or drove away the other northern nomads, and instituted a tributary system over the Acrasian city-states. In Great Myrina itself, only women were allowed to own property and inherit wealth. Myrine men, much shorter than other Acrasian men, were second-class citizens, and required to accede to the will of their wives in most circumstances. Non-Myrine men were enslaved, and breeding with one was punishable by death for Myrine females. In this way, Myrines maintained their uncommon dimorphism between the genders. When the purebred population would grow too thin, women were often taken as tribute from the city-states to harems, where they would bear the children of Myrine men. Much is written of the brutality of the Myrine Empire. Like other Acrasian states, they maintained a long tradition of chattel slavery. Though female warriors formed elite units, Myrine men still formed the core of their forces with helot troops to shore up their numbers. Myrine women were also hostile and unsympathetic to other Acrasian women, often reported to show disinterest when one would die in childbirth, so long as the baby survived. Myrines would also make war upon their tributary states for sport, a practice known as the Exutia Games. These short conflicts would be fought mostly in lightly populated border territories. Myrine raiding parties would freely kill other Acrasians and plunder their goods without any reparation for the victims. In times of unrest or famine, the games would take place every 5 to 10 years, while during the height of the Myrine Empire, they took place every single year. Starting 200 years before the fall, Great Myrina entered a slow decline as it faced a series of hardships, most notably plagues that eliminated a large number of the purebred Myrine upper class. This political turmoil resulted in corruption that eventually bled the empire dry and sapped its ability to make war for anything other than games and profit. 115 brought with it a larger than usual number of slave rebellions, which the tributary states took advantage of, declaring war on Great Myrina. Assaulted on all sides, the Myrine Empire collapsed, all of its land being divided up between the victorious Acrasian states in 112 before the fall. The greater population of Acrasia considered Myrine women unnatural, and subsequently, their culture heretical. All Myrine women that were captured were executed rather than enslaved. Few escaped this fate, as the nomadic culture had faded from memory by this time and been replaced with a decadent urbane culture that was wholly unprepared for life on the run. Myrine men were folded into the general Acrasian slave population. In the present day, it is exceedingly uncommon, but not unheard of for women of serf or slave descent to be born tall and excel in strength and athletics. It is speculated that this is due to Myrine blood having been mixed into the Razvaline line through the general distribution of the Acrasian slave trade. The opaque nature of serf heritage makes confirming this theory all but impossible. The Perunic Kingdom. Foundation, roughly 1,000 years before the fall. Disappearance, year 0, or the year of the fall. The great thousand-year empire of the Perunic people. The kingdom can trace its origins to the legendary Yaroslav Perun. The Perunic sagas detail Yaroslav's journeys through the lands he would later rule over. Beginning as a lowly peasant and losing his parents to a raid, Yaroslav Perun was first a slave to an unknown tribe. He then escaped and became a common bandit. In time, he accrued vast wealth and a small following of other thieves and vagabonds, eventually taking over a small village. Several successful financial ventures followed. Funded by both his ill-gotten gains and his more legitimate enterprises, Yaroslav Perun expanded his small domain into a county. He took his first wife, a local duchess. The sagas note that he was still a powerful, strong and handsome man, despite being well into his 70s by this time. Perun's realm grew, through either war or other means, until he took the crown of Listeria. He then fought a war with the wealthy and powerful kingdom of Tarsan, seizing it as well. Now, well over 300 years old, Yaroslav Perun ruled over what would be known as the Perunic Kingdom. Though he was almost certainly immortal, he ultimately was not invulnerable. The Perunic sagas end with his death in 682 before the fall, from an infected cut he suffered on a large iron nail. His mortal sons continued their father's enterprise of conquest, eventually conquering much of the eastern lands until they were finally stopped at the Baros Mountains around 429 before the fall. The kingdom would often war with the Janshanan civilizations beyond the mountains, but ultimately, they proved too hazardous for the kingdom to cross over in force. The Perunic Kingdom instead settled into an era of luxury as the population became assimilated by the extremely prolific Perunic line. Scientific developments were slow, but the Perunics remained far wealthier and more powerful than their neighbors to the west. Attempts to colonize the west by sea were made, though one by one these failed, all except for one, the prison colony of Rura Penthi. 1 year before the fall, at the height of the Perunic civilization, a meteor fell from the sky. The meteor struck a mountaintop and exploded, scattering burning debris over a wide area and setting the great city of Lavina alight. As the kingdom dealt with this catastrophe, a scourge crawled from one of the fragments in the distant countryside far from the impact site. These strange centipede-like creatures could burrow into the spines of other living things, both animal and human, and seize control of their bodies. The forms of their victims would then be garishly twisted to suit the combat, nesting or reproductive needs of the next generation of horrors. Because of their ever-changing nature, they were dubbed the Morphechskoye. It was believed by all who encountered the Morphechskoye that they had to be demonic in nature, though the magic of the Perunic paladins proved useless against them. Like a pestilence, they spread in exponential numbers across the countryside. The initial handful of runners and zombies multiplied into thousands, and soon enough millions, devouring all in their way, and turning the landscape into a mass of chitin and flesh. Arrows and spears bounced off the thick armor of their most powerful strains, and populations sickened and died under clouds of virulent diseases. The kingdom, one of the largest nations on the face of the planet, fell within a single year. The destruction wrought by the Morphechskoye was such that only a few thousand Perunics successfully escaped their homeland by sea. The foul creatures devoured the rest, and then all life in the land, when it became clear they could not easily pass over the Baros Mountains. Ultimately, the creatures starved to death, unable to expand north, and unable to cross the sea. The bodies they left behind decayed into poisonous dust that scoured anything they did not eat. The once verdant lands of the Perunics became a cold, windswept, toxic desert. Little of the 1,000 years of Perunic culture remains to study. Some expeditions have ventured into the ruins along the coastline, but these missions are difficult to supply due to the distances involved, and the complete lack of anything to hunt or harvest upon arrival. Most of what is known about the Perunic civilization comes from the records of the Rura Penthi penal colony. The fall of the Perunics marked a turning point in the history of the race, and year 0 in the new calendar, Anno Imprisoner, of Rura Penthi. The Holy Gelavar Hegemony of the Zelenwald nation. Foundation, roughly 700 before the fall. Disappearance, 94 Anno Imprisoner, known constituent polities, the most serene kingdom of Gelander, kingdom of Ultimo, kingdom of Malact, Grand Duchy of Tankania. The Kingdom of Gelander was a nation formed of the original adherents of the Gelavar faith, founded and protected by the Gelander Paladin Order. Armed with faith and powerful holy magic, the Paladins and their priestly auxiliaries, the Monks of Guidance, defeated the Zelenwald Druidic tribes that ruled the northern reaches of Eumenides. Upon freeing the populations the Druids ruled over, all were converted to the Gelavar faith, by force if necessary. Those with disparate cultures settled lands outside the Gelander kingdom to found their own nations. Several hundred years after their founding, an alliance of Gelavar nations, led by the Kingdom of Gelander, including the technologically advanced Kingdom of Malact and the populous Kingdom of Ultimo, launched a crusade on the remaining Druidic tribes surrounding their territory. The Druid hosts were run down and destroyed, their magic practitioners killed, and any who knew their oral traditions would have their tongues cut out. Following decades of persecution and insurgencies, the Gelavar finally wiped out the last known Druid cult surviving on their land. The hegemony was established with the serene kingdom of Gelander at its head. As the Paladins had been the strongest military force during the Northern Crusade, they were seen fit to be the rulers of this order. As time went on, and the Druidic threat waned, the Paladins became more of a political and theocratic social class than a military order. Though the Druids were destroyed, a new threat emerged in the form of demonic cults that had taken root in the great cities during the Age of the Druids. Druidic magic was particularly vulnerable to fire, so many people had made pacts or conducted sacrifices in secret under their rule. This activity changed little under the rule of the Gelavar, remaining a closely guarded conspiracy. The Gelavar nation itself was eventually infiltrated by many of the demonic faithful, who used their influence to undermine the hegemony from within. Gelavar scholars also insisted on studying demonic artifacts, rather than destroying them. This gave the demonic forces that flowed from them plenty of time to whisper into the hearts of priests and scholars. Some of these artifacts found their way into the hands of Gelavar nobility as gifts or trinkets, where they would eventually corrupt the heirs to the thrones of Gelander, Malact and Ultimo, along with many lesser nobles. Driven mad by demonic influence, the kings of the Gelavar began to war amongst themselves, devastating their civilizations. In the midst of this, the various demonic cults that had remained hidden for centuries sprang forth, summoning demons and raising the dead. The hegemony, devastated as it was by internal fighting, could not hope to resist these supernatural threats, and all major cities and towns eventually fell to corruption or invasion by demonic hosts. The once green lands of Zelenwald burned and became ashen under an orange sky choked with red storm clouds. The lands once inhabited by the Gelavar are now known as the Marachnost Wastes. Here and there small villages cling to what little they can of the old faith and culture. Refugees that traveled south into Acrasia and the Vladavina also brought with them what texts they could carry, but much of Zelenwald's heritage and culture has been long since lost. Afterword. Each of these civilizations serves as a grim reminder to the fragility of human life, and the danger that forces beyond our understanding pose to our petty empires. One should always keep the faith, and take heed of sorcery wherever it may be found.